Hey everyone, whoa, that was really loud. Let me back that down. Hey everyone, today we're here to talk about the installation of your new 11.6 on your Trek Rail e-bike. We're going to be installing the shock on a Trek Rail that's outfitted with the through shaft trunnion mount shock. With this particular model, you have 4 individual bolts that hold the shock into place. Using a 5mm hex key, we're simply going to remove all 4 bolts, which will allow us to remove the shock. On this particular bike, you can see, or you may notice, that I actually have tied the rear end of the bike. Holding the rear end in place just makes it a little bit easier to remove and reinstall the shock. So again, using my 5mm hex key, I'm just going to go and start removing the 4 bolts, the 2 upper bolts and the 2 lower bolts. Okay, so I've already removed the 2 lower bolts. I have the non-drive side upper bolt removed. And now, before removing the last bolt, I'm actually going to just hold on to the shock so I can easily slide that away. You'll want to be careful, as there are spacers in between the shock and the links, which may fall out like they just did. So now that the stock shock has been removed, we need to install the new 11.6. As with all 11.6 rear shocks, it comes complete with all of the mounting hardware installed. One thing that's unique about the Trek is we also include a complete upper and lower pivot axle kit to convert this from the trunnion mount to the standard eyelet system that we're going to install. Okay, so before installing your new 11.6 rear shock, we need to make sure that all 4 of the individual bearing spacers are installed inside of the upper link and inside of the lower yoke. Applying a little bit of bearing grease to the face of the spacer can aid in installing it and getting it to stick into the bearing, which just makes installation a little bit easier. Okay, so to start the installation, I'm going to start at the top first, which is also going to use the longer of the 2 supplied axle pins. I'm simply going to align the hardware inside of the spacers, the bearing spacers that we installed, which can be a little tricky. Once I slide the upper mount into position, I'm going to simply slide my axle pin all the way through. So now that the upper axle pin and upper mount is installed, I'm going to repeat the same process at the bottom. I'm going to guide the lower shaft end eyelet into the frame in between the spacers and install the shorter lower axle that was supplied with your kit. And again, you're going to push it all the way through to the other side. Moving the wheel up and down may be necessary to help center up the axle pin. Okay, so now that we have the shock installed and both the upper and lower push axles are installed, the last thing we need to do is just simply install the bolts and torque the upper and lower axle to 10 Newton meters. We also like to apply a little bit of blue thread locker on this steel bolt before we install it, just to help secure things in place. If you don't have thread locker, it's just a really good idea to, every once in a while, check the torque on that bolt to make sure it's staying tight. Now that we've installed the axle pin and the bolt on the other side, we need to torque to final spec. We always like to do final torque on mountain bikes with them on the ground, because this puts all of the tension on the system and prevents that creaking or pop sound you might hear from time to time when you install a shock in the stand and then put it on the ground. So we're simply going to put our torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters, a hex key on the other side, so that's it. That's how easy it is to remove and install your new 11.6 rear shock. A couple things to note. First is the new 11.6 that you've installed in your rail utilizes our upper spherical mount ball bearing system, which improves small bump sensitivity and traction. It's completely normal for your shock to be able to rotate side to side. Next, it's ready to ride like all 11.6 shocks. All the compression settings in both modes, your rebound adjust, your spring preload, have all been preset at the factory, and the settings card is in your box. Now it's time to just get out and ride.